Wonderful to join everyone here this afternoon for such an important topic. And I'll just kick it right off by talking about one of the things, and actually before I even get into that, just for anybody that doesn't know that's watching, I work with South Miami Hospital in the Addiction Treatment and Recovery Center. And so by virtue of my working in the field of mental health and substance abuse for 20 plus years, and a lot of that time spent with adolescents and young adults, the topics that we're discussing today, timely, relevant, and come up quite often with the youth that we encounter at South Miami Hospital and with their families. So talking specifically about school, let's say, here are some things that we hear from teenagers and young adults that come to us, and unfortunately they often come to us when the problems have become so great, the stressors have become so great, and the consequences of that, including underage drinking and oftentimes drug use, are in large part perpetuated by stress they feel at school. So what do we hear? That kids nowadays, that's such a common phrase, right? Kids nowadays just inundated with pressures related to school, a lot of homework, where once there was downtime when they got out of school, and this is just as true, especially true for seniors, that downtime after school is now spending so many hours working on homework. So they've got all of the pressures to be able to keep their grades up, and it's very difficult for that teenager, that young adult, to move away from just trying to survive, right? Boy, I just got to hang on. I got to get all this stuff done. I got to keep my life balanced, but to actually thrive, which is what we want for our kids. We want them to be able to thrive. And so one of the things that we're sure to teach adolescents and young adults and to teach their families is the importance of balance. It's so easy to say that, so difficult to do that. I know how difficult it is for me, especially today, feeling that challenge. But it's important that we be models. I know my wife and I work really hard to do that with our kids. My daughter's 19. She graduated high school. So a lot of what I'm talking about today comes from that point of reference. She graduated high school 6 months ago and is in her first year of college. So just that balance in managing stress and our children looking to us as models for healthy balance and how to thrive, not just survive, is really key. I had the privilege of speaking at the Miami-Dade College orientation some months back, and I love how one of the students who had recently just gotten into the honors college, the very honors college my daughter goes to, how that young person described the stress involved with school, but specifically talked about the importance of finding their voice, and that for that person, and I thought this was very profound, it was certainly helpful to me, that finding their voice really lies at the intersection of knowing what the greatest need is out there that they feel like they can fill, what their conscience tells them that they really want to be a part of. What is this important effort that I want to contribute my life to? What are their talents? This person said, in order for me to thrive, I need to know what my talents are, what my conscience tells me, what the need is out there. And that, at the intersection of those things lies, as that young person put it, their ability to thrive. And I thought that was such an important point to mention, and like I said, certainly something that I was taught that day. So that's just some information there for you about school, and talking a little bit about friends. We know with all of us, just as true for us adults, but especially true for teenagers and young adults, is the importance of nurturing healthy, happy, productive relationships in social circles and with their friends. So here's what we hear, what I hear from some of the young minds and families that are really, as they describe it, doing it in a positive and a very healthy way. A couple things stand out. I think a lot of these things are kind of common sense, but again, not as easy to do as they are to know, which is, they don't give up themselves for a friendship. They don't sacrifice their values, their guiding principles. So we know that that's an important thing to take into consideration when forming friendships, and that it's just as important to not expect that of their friends, that they give them the space that they need to thrive, and that they don't have any unrealistic expectations in those social circles, those friendly relationships, and how one responds to pressure. I can tell you that, as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes we'll see teenagers and young adults that come to us, having developed a drinking problem or a substance use issue. And a lot of times they'll say that the key driver behind that was, boy, I just didn't know how to respond to the pressure, especially the pressure that I felt in managing these friendships. One thing that's come up a lot is the importance of social media, which I know David's going to talk more about, and how it's so different now trying to manage a virtual relationship, where once it was about this, eye contact and being next to each other and nurturing that relationship in close proximity. Now there's the added pressure of managing multiple relationships across multiple devices, and how communication can get broken down, and trust can get broken down just by a simple tweet or a text. So when it comes to developing friendships, those are some of the things that we hear and that I hear from teenagers and young adults. Moving now to kids and their relationships with parents. Boy, it's different today, and I know, again, my esteemed colleague here is going to present some wonderful examples about just how things are different today, but how different it is for a parent and a child to develop together, nurture and foster a healthy relationship. Anymore, a lot of times we hear kids that come to us, and we hear the parents say, I really feel like my son or daughter is raising me. There are more pressures and demands placed on me as a parent to accommodate all of their pressures, that I'm kind of going by what they're telling me to do. And it's just interesting to hear how kind of the power differential has shifted, at least kind of from what I knew it to be with my parents. And that, I think that's an important point for us to bring up here, which is, what can we as adults, as role models in kids' lives, do to assume that great responsibility and assume that influence that comes with us being parents and role models, but do that in a respectful way that honors our kids and all that they're going through, that honors their stress, that acknowledges outright, hey, I think I have a good idea what this must be for you. How can I help? And so, moving away from who demands what and kind of that unequal power to, I think, shared responsibility and love and trust. Again, those are some of the things that I see in families that are doing things what I would say are the healthy, right, responsible way. And in talking about substance use, this is a key pressure facing our kids, and I'm talking about, and I'm sure we all know, children going down to middle school, elementary school, and kids are being offered alcohol, as we know, and being offered drugs at a much earlier age than in times past. And we hear a lot of teenagers. We hear a lot, especially when they've made that move going into college, that the pressures they feel to drink socially and manage those relationships, as difficult as they are anyway, to do that while they feel like most people around them are drinking. And we put the word myths up there, for this reason. One of the things that we hear from kids is this assumption that they have that all their friends are doing it, right? It's such a common statement, and it's a common misconception. That kids say, well, all my friends are doing it, and that's why I did it. When we're sitting with a family and parents are asking their child, boy, what made you do this? That's usually the first thing we hear. All my friends are doing it. But we know, research has told us, research reflects that that's not really the case, that the friends of these young people are drinking or using drugs as often as they think that they are. So we dispel some of those myths by giving some facts and of course giving some healthy coping strategies, how to develop and nurture positive relationships with people who choose not to drink underage, that choose not to use drugs. And I know when David picks it up here again in a little bit, you've got some wonderful things to be able to share about kind of the mutual agreement parents make with kids if they make the decision not to use and whatnot. But boy, substance use is definitely a key factor. So moving on to self-worth. We see, I think even more so nowadays, where kids have the opportunity to, all of us do, it's just as true for us adults, that it's not just how I present to you in person, it's that life, that world, that image of myself that I create virtually, that I create on Facebook, that I create through text messaging and through Instagram and things like that. And again, going back to what we hear from the young adults that are coming to the Addiction Treatment and Recovery Center, boy, this is something that comes up a lot. I've developed this, kind of paraphrasing here what we hear, I've developed this persona. It's so much easier for me to maintain a social relationship virtually because I say things that I wouldn't say to somebody necessarily in person. And helping, I think any human being, but it's especially important when doing this with a teenager and a young adult, helping them realize what those key things are to define their self-worth, and that it doesn't have to be defined by this image that they feel like they have to portray to their friends and the world around them, but it's about knowing what their character, their values, their guiding principles are. And that's important to us in our program to really start when working with a teenager, when working with a young adult, to have them identify what their talents are, what their conscience tells them, what do they think their guiding principles are, and then helping them through their own voice and through their own words identify their real value, their real self-worth. So again, these are just some of the 5 or 6 things that I hear come up almost daily as it relates to seniors in high school, and even going younger than that, and young adults going into college. So
thank you, David. I want you to name this tune for me, if you would, please. Imagine, if you would, as David says, a generation ago, a young man, it's a TV sitcom, puts a baseball inadvertently through a neighbor's window. He feels guilty about it, but he's not sure if he's going to disclose. His older brother's best friend says, "Don't say a word. Nobody saw us. You'll get away with it." Kid goes home. There's his mom with a silk blouse, string of pearls, 3 fresh vegetables on the table. There's his dad wearing a suit and tie, not exactly sure what he did for a living. And let's be real, there were no people of color. There were no one with a different sexual orientation. It was a pretty white bread and white kind of world here in Northern California. But let's ignore that for a second and get back to the dinner table, where there's no discussion overtly of religion, but it is about morality. It's about ethics. And that kid in the 21 minutes, excluding the commercials, comes clean and says, "Dad, I broke a window next door. I feel terrible about it." And his father stands up and he does the right thing. And he says, "Son, you're going to have to get a job at the market. You're going to have to bag groceries. You're going to do that for 8 weeks, and you're going to pay her back." Cut, print, that's a wrap. That's the end of the show. And fast forward now a generation, and even without parental controls, my 14-year-old daughter can flip through the channels and she can see the following scene in a similar sitcom, except that it's in color as opposed to black and white, and there's a boy and a girl instead of a couple of boys. But it's pretty much the same show fast forward, and the 15-year-old young man says about his 17-year-old older sister, describes her as she whose head can never be seen as a car. She whose head can never be seen in a car. That's right, you're shocked. It got past the censors because they said, well, it's just because she's smooching. But that's not where your mind went, young lady, and that's not where my mind went either. It's a different culture, and that's not even the protected shows. There are no assumptions anymore. You can take nothing for granted. It used to be, when we were growing up in this town, I could go over to Val's house and she could come over to mine and David could come over, and there was an understanding. Nowadays, Peggy Sapp will advise us, before you allow your child to do an afternoon visit play date, never mind a sleepover, you got to get some things figured out. Do you have access to internet pornography that the children can see in your house? Do you have guns that aren't locked? And do you have a medicine cabinet that my child can get to and say, oh, what an idea. Is there alcohol around? Is there all the process addictions, all the incipient addictions that kids, remember, addiction's a disease. It's not a choice, but it starts out as poor judgment, and then it becomes too late. Video games are bigger than movies. It's the biggest multi-billion-dollar, and if you think that the video gamers aren't going to use that dodge, everybody needs computers to send emails, everybody needs to do word processing, everybody needs to go out on the internet to do research. This is the same argument that cigarette companies use when they say, we're not trying to get everybody addicted. What we are trying to do is to provide a service for those of you who already choose to smoke. Are you kidding? This reminds me of the marijuana argument. Marijuana is not harmful. It's less addictive than cigarettes and alcohol. Really? That's your best argument? That's the best you can do, is to say that being shot with a bazooka is not as bad as being killed with a hand grenade? I guess. There are programs starting up every month for video game addicts. Not talking about the 90% of people who have a glass of wine on a Friday night. My 89-year-old mom, God bless her, every now and again will have a glass of wine. And my wife will go out with her girlfriend. She teaches 4th grade. And they'll have a glass of wine now again. Nobody's talking about them. Nobody's talking about y'all if you're playing Words with Friends, as long as you're not on an airplane sitting next to Alec Baldwin. We're not talking about the 90% of people who have a drink to feel good. We're talking about the 10% of people who have to drink or use so they don't feel bad. And it's the same thing with your video game addicts. If they are using now and again, no one's going to bust your door down like on Law and Order, the SWAT teams with all those cute policemen and the black outfits. That's not what's happening. We're talking about kids who are unable to function. We're talking about a couple overseas, thank goodness, but this could have been in your community or mine. A mom and a dad left an 8-month-old baby upstairs while they were down in the gaming parlor, starved to death. You can't make this stuff up, as Dave Barry says. Google it. It's true. It's a terrible tragedy. Your children, you owe it to your children to teach them to be informed consumers about media and to determine whether or not, after watching binge television, 9 consecutive shows, whether they feel better or worse than when they started. After playing 45 minutes of Madden, hey, why not? But what about when you've played 6 hours of Madden for the 42nd consecutive day and you haven't been to class or had a hot meal or taken a shower or done anything productive and helpful? It's our responsibility as parents in this toxic culture to say to our kids, hey. And for many families, just like for alcoholics, 1 is too many, 100 is not enough. So now what can you do about this as parents? You can stand up. You can say, we pay the mortgage. These children, we love them to pieces. We'd give them a kidney if they needed one. But we understand that they came to live with us. We didn't go to live with them. You have power, moms and dads, not abusive power. But you have the moral responsibility to stand up and say to your kids, in our home, we have, for examples, doors on the bedrooms and the bathroom. In our home, this is the way we do things. As Informed Families teaches us, we have dinner together as a family 4 or 5 nights a week. And that lessens the likelihood that our kids will become involved in drugs and alcohol. There's a causal relationship there, not just correlative. And in our home, we have a 0 tolerance policy for drugs and alcohol. It's so easy to point fingers. As an addiction professional, we know that there's a little irony in the following story. I don't know why my 19-year-old daughter just had a second baby out of wedlock and is hanging around with this mid-level drug dealer and has made every bad choice, flunked out of college, and is going nowhere. Whenever we would smoke marijuana with her, we told her only use in moderation as we do. Before we throw stones, before we point fingers, let's take a look in the mirror and let's see if we are setting the example. You don't cut the puppy dog's tail off an inch on Monday and another inch on Tuesday, and then it painful and blood and it heals, and another inch on Wednesday. If you're going to make a decision, make a decision. Stand up and say, in our home, we have a zero tolerance policy.
One of the things that I was thinking of as you guys were talking is, here at Informed Families, our 4 universal campaigns are geared to these same issues that you talked about. We have our Family Day, the importance of sitting down and having conversation during dinner or breakfast, whatever meal you choose. We find that our children need this conversation. They need to know that their parents are engaged in their lives. We have our Red Ribbon campaign, where we're saying it can be cool to say no to drugs. And then we have our Lock Your Meds. So many of our parents, as you said, David, are wanting to be cool and wanting their children to be accepted, will allow drinking and smoking parties that they have in their homes. And then they have these drugs that are there. Could be Adderall, which is the most misused drug, and we know so many of our kids who have hyperactivity may have that drug, and we need to lock these things away so that our homes are a safe environment, and that's what our Safe Home and Safe Parties is all about, making a safe environment for our kids. Fantastic presentation. Thank you, David, so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Val.
for those that are here present with us.